How you guys doing? Here to do another little tour, guys. Today we're going to be doing a neighborhood known as Boerum Hill. Now, I've done lots of videos in the vicinity of this area, so I've covered the area of like Park Slope, Gowanus, Carroll Gardens, Cobble Hill. So what I'm going to do, so I don't repeat myself a million times, well, first of all, watch all those videos. Yeah, there you go, links, all right. But also, I'll tell you some cool stories in this neighborhood, what makes it kind of unique, all right? That being said, before I start, Cam, how are you?
Feeling good.
Great. Me too, despite the fact that we're shooting in a playground right now, and I feel like a complete weirdo, but you know, we're in a secluded part, relax. Anyways, before we start, guys, if you've seen these videos before, check out the Patreon. That's how we fund these things. Guys, like, subscribe, do all that stuff now so you don't have to bother and you can just kick back and enjoy. Aside from that, we got a lot of history to cover. I gotta get out of here. I think we're starting to creep some people out. What do you think, Cam? Should we keep going?
I think we gotta leave.
I think we gotta leave too. Let's get started. Yeah. Starting from the beginning, remember this part of Brooklyn here, as I've talked about in past videos, was home to the Canarsie Native Americans, who were kind of a subgroup of the Lenape. Were here in New York City in the 1600s when the Dutch settlers arrived. Remember, a lot of these names in New York are actually derived from the Lenape and the Algonquin language and the different dialects, like for example, Manhattan. It is derived from Mannahatta, Canarsie, Rockaway. Canarsie, you know, like the neighborhood here in Brooklyn. The further out you go into Long Island, the more of these names you come across, you know, like Ronkonkoma, which is a great word. That's a great word. That's a good word. You can start using that when you know, wake up and stub your toe, or when you lose everything on the stock market. It's a nice little replacement for a curse word or something. But you'll have these words, and these because of the Native Americans who were here before. So this area here pertained to North Gowanus, which was still part of Brooklyn, which was one of the 6 towns of the Dutch. These towns were, 5 of them were Dutch and 1 of them were British, but they were the 6 towns that here in this part of Long Island in the end of the 1600s. One was Brooklyn. You had Boswick, or Bush, what eventually became Bushwick. You had what became Flatbush. You had Gravesend. These were all, there's a little map. I talk about this a lot. There's a lot of important things you got to talk about in Brooklyn, one being the 6 towns. You got to talk about the Brooklyn Bridge, you got to talk about the consolidation of 1898, but the towns are one of them. So there's your alert. Remember this, 6 towns. But it was very important also in the Revolutionary War history. There you go. That was another topic you need to know, is the Revolutionary War. That's a segue right there, huh? Segue alert. But yeah, 1776, the Battle of Brooklyn. Battle of Brooklyn, Battle of Long Island, Battle of Strong Island, depending on who you ask and how many drinks they've had. But it was the first major battle of the Revolutionary War. In August 27, 1776, they pushed through to where, like around where the Verrazano Bridge is, and they basically pushed Washington's Continental Army forces all the way to what is today Brooklyn Heights. Under the cover of night on August 29th, 1776, he escaped because he was going to have to surrender the next morning. But he got out, he kept everyone quiet, they evacuated thousands of troops, and they eventually left the city completely, only to return in 1783 to take it back for the Americans. It was the headquarters for the British during the war, but I digress. I'm actually standing at the corner of Bond and Pacific Street, where in 2017, a well was discovered. They were doing some work here, and they discovered a 35-foot well that still has water at the bottom of it. There's a little plaque here to commemorate it, but they're thinking of maybe putting like a plexiglass thing over it so you could actually see down. It should be pretty cool. Make sure it's extra strong so all those e-bikes that are flying down the street don't make it crack. But yeah, it's on this, it pertained to Fort Box, which was one of the fortifications of Washington's troops as they were pushed back. So there is history here. It's right under our feet, literally. But it was Native American, it was Revolutionary War, but there's also more history pertaining to that as well, which we'll cover as we go. We're just getting started, baby. Okay, so as the neighborhood grew, you had other things kind of pop up too to cater to the growing population here, right? So I'm actually standing in front of what was a Carnegie Library. So Andrew Carnegie's a rich dude, one of the richest men in the world at the time. He actually made a fortune off steel and railroads. He actually donated most of his $400 million fortune while he was alive. Good luck getting someone to do that today. But he spent $60 million funding almost 1,700 libraries around the country in the early 1900s. I'm actually standing in front of one here at the corner of Pacific and 4th. Today it's part of the Brooklyn Public Library system, but it was built in the early 1900s here to cater to the population. It was meant for the workers, for the people who couldn't otherwise get to a vast library. They didn't have their fancy mahogany desks and shelves in their house, so they relied on things like this. Carnegie, very famous Scottish immigrant, came and made his fortune. He wrote a book called The Gospel of Wealth, which you would think today is it's the Bible pretty much today, I guess. But it's not what you think it is, actually. He actually believed that you should give your money away while you're alive, and if you hoard money and all that, it's actually kind of a bad thing. He used to say, "He who dies rich dies disgraced." That sure as hell ain't the saying that people are living by today. But yeah, he wrote all these things, and he gave all this money to build libraries all over the country. In fact, as part of that program, he spent $300,000 to build DC's oldest library, still there, very pretty, and also to cities all around the country. In fact, Woodbine, Iowa, they would lend out cake pans because the different neighborhood libraries cater to their different communities. Well, in Woodbine, Iowa, they needed cakes and pans, so that's what they lent out. Screw frickin' 1984 and Lord of the Flies. I need pound cake. Give me a pan. So that kind of stuff, you could see how it was very important to every community that they were put in. Other things started popping up in the neighborhood too that also continued to help it grow and become more cultured. One of those things, the subway. Now, people forget that the first line of the actual IRT, built through Manhattan, was built in 1904, but the BRT came shortly after. In fact, right near us is the Transit Museum over on Schermerhorn Street. And actually you can go there and see, cars from the early 1900s. It's like this old used station. By the way, little trivia, Cam, the Hoyt Schermerhorn stop is where they shot the Bad music video for Michael Jackson. You know that song, Cam?
By who?
Michael Jackson.
Who?
All right, you kids, you're playing with me. You know who Michael Jackson is. But the Bad music video was shot in the Hoyt Schermerhorn station. And, it was actually, here's some trivia, directed by Martin Scorsese, was the debut of Wesley Snipes, who played the villain in the short, and he took the job from Prince, who was initially supposed to play that role, but he gave it up because he didn't want to be in the video where the song's line was, "Your butt is mine." It's like, "Your butt is mine." He didn't want to be associated with that. A little bit homophobic, but, paved the way for Wesley Snipes. Anyways, that's all the trivia. You can take that to the bank, huh? Look at all that information I just gave you in 3 sentences. Good Lord, I could just add a bunch of drone footage and corny, royalty-free music, and that could be the whole video for 8 minutes. But I'm gonna give you more, baby. Just one little sentence in this whole thing. Let's keep it moving. All right, so one of the more interesting stories, in my opinion, of this neighborhood is the neighborhood was considered Little Caughnawaga. So as the neighborhood developed, we talked about the library and stuff, and as New York developed, you had people building skyscrapers, and one of those groups was the Mohawk Native Americans. Now the story is that at one point, 15% of the ironworkers building the skyscrapers of New York City were Mohawk. And the story begins in 1886 when they were building a bridge over the St. Lawrence River that went into the Caughnawaga Reservation just south of Montreal. There's about 7,000 people there, about 12,000 acres. Not huge, but as part of the deal, they had to include as employees, some of those Mohawks. Now, there were like 7,000 and live there. They were going to include them as kind of like carrying things that weren't actually up in the air and whatever, taking risks. But they found that a lot of the Mohawks who did work were basically climbing all over the bridge and stuff when they weren't on their work hours. So like, holy crap, these guys might actually be good at the ironwork. So they trained a few of them and they realized that, wow, this actually did work out pretty well. So much so that by 1907, you had like 70 licensed and registered or whatever and trained ironworkers there. And they kept growing. And they say that in 1915, a man named John Diabo made his stop here in Boerum Hill. He came to New York to start working on the different projects here. So by the way, in 1907, there was actually a disaster. A bridge fell called the Quebec Bridge. It actually fell, and like 90-something people died, but 35 Mohawks died in that accident. So one of the things that they took from that is that we can't just be centralized in the same projects here. We got to go out and work on other things. So in 1915, they came here. So I'm standing in front of 375 State Street, which was actually the home to one of those buildings that housed almost entirely those Mohawks. It's right around the corner from 75 Nevin Street, which was the Wigwam. It's not anymore. It was the bar that they all hung out at. They used to have a sign on the door that said, "Through these doors walk the greatest ironworkers in the world." Pretty cool. Much better sign than most bars have on their doors. It's like, you know, save water, drink beer or something. But it was written about by Joseph Mitchell in his essay Mohawks in High Steel, where he talked about this community. At one point there was 800 different Mohawks in this neighborhood made their home here. It was Little Caughnawaga. Pretty cool. And this building was pretty much filled with Mohawks, so much so that people didn't lock their doors. Everyone knew everyone in the building, so they just didn't lock their doors, which some would argue is more dangerous than being hundreds of feet up in the air on a steel beam here in New York, but you know, they got away with it. It's not so much anymore here. One of the reasons being that they made a throughway to the actual reservation that cut the travel time in half from 12 hours to 6 hours, meaning that people didn't need to stay here for such pronounced periods of time, and also didn't need to bring their families here. So that was one reason, and they moved on to other parts of the city as well. One of the reasons it started here was because over on Atlantic Street was Local 361. That was the ironworkers union that a lot of them went to find work, to network, and all of those things. They even had a church right around the corner called Kyler Presbyterian that a lot of them frequented, and they had a yearly powwow there. The actual pastor there, David Corey, taught himself the language and even translated the book of Luke and did services in the Mohawk language that a lot of them spoke. Some people actually thought the powwow was blasphemous, some Christians, but some Christians think that Harry Potter is evil, so you can't win everything. But yeah, up until like the 70s, this was really a concentrated community. There were different reasons why they moved on to different places and all that, but even today, about 10% of the ironworkers are Mohawk as well. They had a hand in pretty much every major construction in New York. The Verrazano, the World Trade Center, the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building, you name it. If it happened in the 20th century, major construction here in New York City, the Mohawk Native Americans were working on. In fact, Cam, do you know the picture Lunch Atop a Skyscraper, where they're all sitting on the steel beam eating lunch? Yep. And Charles Ebbets? Of course you do, you liar. You're a dirty liar, but oh, and you do know it. Everyone knows it. If you don't know it, just walk into any dorm room in the country. It'll be up on the wall next to the Scarface poster and the Bob Marley, made up of little Bob Marleys. But yeah, very famous photo. 3 of the guys on that steel beam are Mohawks. There you go. Bet you didn't know that. Did you, Cam?
No, I did not.
I didn't think so. All right, this was all Little Caughnawaga. This is 375 State Street, where a lot of those Mohawks lived, but a fascinating story. Yeah, let's keep it moving, man. Yeah, this is a good one. Okay, so the neighborhood kind of fell into disrepair after World War II as a lot of people left the cities. I've talked about this in a million videos. You had white flight, you had all that stuff. This area was called North Gowanus, by the way. This was all called North Gowanus because we're near the Gowanus Canal. You can't really see it from here, but you can smell it, baby. On a hot day, you can smell it. It was a super fun site, like incredibly filthy. They actually started to clean it up, but it still kind of stinks. And actually, the sewage actually pours out to it on rainy days because it floods and its sewage pours. It's pretty gross. But now, go figure, they're building waterfront condos on the Gowanus Canal. Very expensive. I don't know. So you have some rich tech bro on his balcony in his Dartmouth sweatshirt eating sushi and drinking White Claws, taking a whiff of the Park Slope people's sewage. But this was all North Gowanus, and it started to kind of slowly change in the 60s and 70s as you had one thing, you had brownstoners come in. Now, as early as the 1960s, you had articles about this in like New York Magazine, The New Yorker. It was this phenomenon where people would come in and buy these brownstones for like $20,000, fix them up, make them nice, and the neighborhood slowly started to change. They'd form associations to protect over slum clearance. They'd do all these kind of things, but it was the reason that this neighborhood is named Boerum Hill. So I'm standing in front of 238 Dean Street, which is the home of Helen Buckler, who is the woman who got Boerum Hill its name. So the way she got it was she saw her son write the word Boerum in red crayon on a white door in her house. Boerum. No, I'm just kidding, that's not true. She actually got it because she went to the Brooklyn Historical Society and saw that a man named Simon Boerum owned a lot of the land here in the 1700s. In fact, Simon Boerum, very famous guy, they say he would have helped sign the Declaration of Independence at the time if he didn't die in 1775. But he owned about 80 acres here, which, by the way, 80 acres in Brooklyn in the 1700s means only one thing: slavery. Yeah, remember, Brooklyn had even more slaves than Manhattan did at the time, Manhattan/New York City. So it was kind of a dark part of Brooklyn's past, but it's important to remember it, even if it is depressing. But it's sad, so here's a picture of my cat. Now, it was named Boerum Hill instead of Sycamore Hill because that was what she was going to name it originally, and Sycamore Hill is pretty generic. That sounds like a freaking, TV show on the CW or something, but that's what she named it. So in 1973, the neighborhood gets its own historic district at the behest of things like Boerum Hill Association, and the neighborhood starts to kind of, be protected and whatnot. In fact, have you ever seen the movie 1970 movie The Landlord, starring Beau Bridges? It took place in Park Slope, but in the vicinity, and it was a really run-down area. That was kind of what it was famous for at the time, and that is in that context that the brownstoning began. But yeah, that's where Boerum Hill got its name. It was North Gowanus before that. Kind of crazy. Well, it was going to continue to develop over time, so let's talk about that. And this freaking truck pulling up trash and all this without beeping, keep it down. I'm trying to make a YouTube video here. Okay, so as the neighborhood opened itself up to the upwardly mobile and different groups, people started to move here and raise their kids and things like that. Well, I'm actually standing in front of 553 Pacific Street, which is where a very famous artist lived for a little while. Do you know who, Kim?
Picasso?
Nope. Nice guess. Very far off. It is Jean-Michel Basquiat. Ah, look at that. So he grew up in Brooklyn, but he moved here when his dad separated from his mom. Before he moved off to Puerto Rico, his mom was Puerto Rican, his dad was Haitian. And he grew up basically with a pencil in his hand. He got a pencil in his hand, at age 6, started drawing, became a member of the Brooklyn Museum at age 7, went and checked out all the masters and all that. Remember, this is before Fortnite. Lord knows if Fortnite existed, he'd just be doing the, like the flossing dance, and, we would have missed out on a ton of great art. But, he grew up with a paintbrush and all that and became very famous after he came back from Puerto Rico, living there briefly. That's right, he was Boricua, part Boricua. He came here and he paired up with a friend and they went around town. He tagged around the name Samo, S-A-M-O, all over the city. It became kind of a thing, like, who is this guy, whatever. He came out as being Samo, it was a big deal, and he started drawing and painting and all that, and then befriended Andy Warhol. By the way, Samo was like for same old. It was kind of like a short thing for same old, right? He eventually befriended Andy Warhol, who took him under his wing, got him a place, and they actually had a show together. Some accused Warhol of leeching off of Basquiat's youth and energy because he was at the end of his career. If you take a look at Warhol, kind of looks like the guy who would leech off the youth. Creepy looking guy. But here's a little fun fact. Basquiat actually had the most expensive art piece ever sold at auction by an American at $110 million for an untitled 1982 piece. But it was recently passed 2 years ago in 2022 by Andy Warhol for $195 million. Wrap your head around that freaking number. What do you do with an art piece when you spend that much on it? You don't put it in, your man cave next to the dartboard. What the hell do you do with it? Although I think that it's all a huge scam by the rich people who just want to jack up the prices of art and then invest and stash their money away there. I'm never going to own a Basquiat, unfortunately. Although I did go to the apartment of a guy once who had, I went to the bathroom in the apartment. He had a freaking Basquiat in the bathroom. Here's a quick trivia question. Touch the screen for the correct answer. If you know it, true or false? That guy was a huge asshole. That's correct. You got it right. Congratulations. And unfortunately, Basquiat died at the age of 27, joining the notorious 27 Club of a heroin overdose. Very sad. He accomplished a lot before the age of 27. But, on the bright side, he never grew up to become an old, bitter artist who just made art to be put in lobbies of investment banks. Lord knows if he was still alive today, we would see, the Jean-Michel Basquiat experience sponsored by Citibank. But yeah, this is Jean-Michel Basquiat's old house here in Boerum Hill on Pacific Street. let's keep it moving. Okay, so the neighborhood continued to kind of develop, more things kind of came up, and it's rare that you get to stand in the presence of absolute greatness. And right now I'm standing in front of one of those places. This building behind me is where the invisible dog leash was invented by a genius by the name of George Zorbas. The building is from 1863, but it was bought in the 1950s as a belt and a fastener factory. It eventually closed down, and in 2009 it was kind of dilapidated, falling apart, and this man named Lucien Zion took it over and created this, which is the Invisible Dog Artist Space. There are 30 different artist studios in the upper levels where people can come and try to come up with the next George Zorbas level genius idea. But also they have like shows and galleries, a pretty cool little space to nurture budding artists. So yeah, it's here to remind you that, you know, these neighborhoods, as they start coming up, they open their doors to people who are trying to make it and then come up with ideas and creatives and all that stuff. Although as the neighborhoods get nicer, it becomes a little harder for those same people to live in these spaces. And this is right near downtown Brooklyn. You can see all the high rises that went up as everything was rezoned with the intent of bringing the 2012 Olympics here. They built the Barclays Center, all that stuff. 2012 Olympics didn't come here, but everything did get bulldozed and they built all these giant buildings anyway. So it's gotten more expensive because of that. But you still have these kind of things here, making their home here, which is kind of comforting to know that these things are here, you know, and maybe one day, you know, someone here comes up with that brilliant idea to the level of the invisible dog leash, and they, you know, get a key to the city. The same one that Diddy got, you know. That's a whole nother video. But yeah, invisible dog, pretty cool. All right. Ho, 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 it's magic, you know. All right, against my better judgment, came back to the same bench in this playground. But you know what, there's no one here, so it's okay. We're gonna finish this video here. Man, we covered a lot today, man. We covered the Revolutionary War, we covered Basquiat, we covered Carnegie, we covered art, we covered wells. Interesting, right, Cam? Did you learn something?
Whole bunch.
Whole bunch. Guys, if you liked it, check out the Patreon. Huge help. So we fund these things. There's some extras on there. Great stuff, baby. Come on. It's a new world we're living in. Support your local business, I guess. Me. Also, too, like and subscribe. And you know what? Comment something. That's great. That always helps the algorithm. Worship at the feet of the algorithm. And, you know, very least, share it with a friend who you think would like this stuff. You know, history's great. Anyways, yeah, I don't know what to tell you guys. We covered a lot. Did a lot. The birds are chirping. Kids are crying. The street sweepers are sweeping. What the hell am I talking about? All right, I'm wasting my time. I gotta go. See y'all later. Sick. Yeah.